Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you. We appreciate you all being here today, and we invite you as our program gets underway to stand, if you're able, for the posting of our colors. We may very well let the American flag that's on display by the fire engines there serve as our posting of the colors. And so please notice that beautiful display throughout our ceremony. Now to officially welcome us to this occasion, Augusta Mayor Deke Copenhaver.
Good morning. I just first want to thank you all for being here today as we remember 9/11, what was a tragic day in our nation's history, but what was also a day that marked heroism, the type of which we've never seen. In New York City, I remember where I was here in Augusta when it happened. I know we all do, but just to see those brave men and women in public service, in uniform, in law enforcement, firefighters, everybody rushing in to try to save lives was an amazing moment for me personally, and I know for all of you. So to all of our public safety officials here today, all of our men and women who serve in that function for this city, for this nation, I just want to say thank you, and once again, thank you all for being here today to mark a tragic but heroic day in our nation's history. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate you. If you'll direct your attention to that massive American flag behind us, we'll have our Pledge of Allegiance. That'll be followed by our national anthem performed today by Miss J.C. Ward, who always does such a beautiful job for us. I pledge allegiance
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, JC. She has been owning that anthem since she was a little girl and just keeps getting better and better every year. We appreciate your participation today for sure. And now please welcome Richmond County Sheriff's Office Chaplain Ken Gross to lead our invocation this morning. Ken?
Would you bow with me, please? Dear God in heaven, we do come this morning to invoke your grace and blessing upon our gathering. We have come to remember, and I thank you for that wonderful gift that you give us, the ability to remember. But as we come today, I ask that we would, though we cannot forget the tragedy of the day, that we would not so much remember the tragedy as to remember the valor of those first responders who gave their ultimate that day so that terrorism might be given setback. We do live in a day to day where, again, terrorism seems to have raised its ugly head. And we ask that you would help this nation and its leaders in making the right decisions to once again free this world of this terrorism that seems to be knocking even at our door. We're also thankful today not just for the valor of those who gave their ultimate sacrifice years ago, but for the valor of our first responders who are here today, who are working today, and today are willing to give that ultimate sacrifice if necessary for the rest of us. We thank you, those of us that are not first responders, for the privilege of stopping today to honor them. We would also remember families who were impacted years ago by 9/11, and they're probably still seriously impacted today, and that you would put your special hand of blessing on those families who gave their loved ones, the loved ones who gave the ultimate sacrifice so that we might live in this wonderful nation. We thank you, and God bless America.
Amen. Well, I don't remember it being this humid on September 11th, 2001, but it was a similar day, wasn't it? Clear for the most part. I think the sky was a deeper blue then. But a lot of the feelings that you get when you stand outside and look around today certainly help us recall the feelings of that day 13 short years ago. I was posting the American flag outside my house about an hour ago and just found it remarkable that it's been 13 long years. My oldest son will soon turn 13 in a matter of days, so we were excited about that while we mourned what was going on in our country. And here we are. I read a report this morning where with the near completion of the One World Trade Center office tower, they call it the Freedom Tower up in New York, the 1,776-foot tall structure that's going to replace the Twin Towers, that with the near completion of that, that perhaps our country might soon start to think of other things other than what happened 13 years ago, that the memories, while they wouldn't be eliminated, might start to be diminished. And certainly for future generations, they might not think about it like we do. A friend in the audience told me a few minutes ago that some people already see that area around Ground Zero as just a nice park, a place to visit when they're in the Big Apple. And so that's a big reason that we continue to have these ceremonies, and that's a big reason that I remain impressed with the turnout and with the time that we set aside to pause, because we'll never let those memories fade. We'll never let that time be forgotten. And you, our first responders, I just get chills being in your presence, not only when I think about what your brothers and sisters did on 9/11, but when I think to as recently as last night, in the moments leading up to our 11 o'clock news, when we prepared a story on the Augusta Fire Department pulling a 12-year-old from the canal. She's fighting for her life as we speak now. I hope she makes it. I pray she makes it. But she wouldn't be able to be waging that fight if they hadn't demonstrated their typical bravery, pulled her out of those waters, those chilly waters down near the aqueduct, and got her to the hospital. So thank you, Fire Department, for that recent news that we're able to report. Similar stories can certainly be told about the sheriff's offices and other law enforcement agencies represented today. Our paramedics, our EMS crews, all represented. Similar stories can be shared about what y'all do, and you know that. And we appreciate the opportunity to have that positive coverage on Channel 6 and Channel 12 and Fox and Channel 26 and the Augusta Chronicle each night, each day. You know, about the time Mayor Copenhaver took the podium, a few minutes ago was about the time that Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. So here it was early on a morning, Tuesday morning back then, that all sorts of stuff was starting to happen. That plane hit the Pentagon. You know what happened in the subsequent hours. The president grounding all flights throughout the country, an unprecedented move. And what time is it now? 9:42? That's the exact moment that the FAA made sure all flights were neither taking off nor landing in the continental United States. A lot of people had to land where they were nearest. Some ended up in Canada. And so we were starting to learn how horrific that day would be. 9:45 a.m., they evacuated the White House and the U.S. Capitol building. Everybody was scrambling for safety. There were rumors running rampant. And then at 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. And so you'll notice throughout our ceremony today two key occasions marked by the tolling of the bell. Lieutenant Brown with the fire department is going to help us with that. And our times will be as close to actual as we can get them. But even though they may end up being approximate times, just know that that's mighty close to when the actual event happened 13 years ago. Yet another way that we reinforce those memories. About 11 o'clock that morning, a few minutes after this ceremony is over, Mayor Rudy Giuliani called for the evacuation of Lower Manhattan. Remember that? 1 million residents, workers, and tourists had to get out. President Bush, already in the air, trying to figure out a safe spot for him to be, ended up in Louisiana by lunchtime, where he placed military around the world on high alert. A busy, busy day indeed, and busy years that have followed. All right, I referenced our Richmond County Sheriff's Office. Its fearless leader is with us today, and it's always good to hear from him on this occasion, get that law enforcement perspective. He's another one of those folks who's fighting the fight each and every day, long before and will long after 9/11. Won't you please welcome Richmond County Sheriff Richard Roundtree.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you all for coming out today. And again, as I was here last year, proud to stand here representing what we're going to be the most premier sheriff office in the state of Georgia, if not in the country, in the coming years. For all the people to come out to celebrate this, for those who have lost, just allow me a few moments to just reflect and bring you the perspective of 9/11 and seeing through so many different eyes. Bastards. That was the headline of the San Francisco Examiner the day after the attacks. You see, there were many different stories and emotions as to where we were when the towers fell. At school, at work, at home, at the grocery store. So many memories of how we felt that day that they challenged our determination. So many emotions as we witnessed the tragedy unfold. How this story is not about just one day, but it's going to be about a series of days that will forever define the history of our nation and test the core of our humanity. See, today is September 11th, and we have and we will from this day forward always come together on this day to pause and reflect on the souls lost and the lives forever affected. See, on this day we saw ordinary people choose duty in the face of death, as many in the Trade Center continued to try to help people out of the building even as it was collapsing around them. We saw loyalty of friends overwhelm the sense of danger as rescue workers searched tirelessly for their own people. We saw ordinary people choose self-sacrifice for the good of strangers as passengers on a plane over Pennsylvania refused to allow the hijackers to succeed. That was September 11th. But as I said, this is not just about one day, it's about a series of days. So on September 12th, there was only one story that was being told. There was only one nationality of people. There was only one direction that we were going. There was only one place that we all knew we had to be. And that was united. See, on September 11th, cowards walked into our living rooms, they punched us in the mouth, and then they ate at our dinner table. But again, on September 12th, we stood up and we brushed ourselves off. We poured ourselves a cup of pride. We found that flag that we had stored in our garage, and we proudly hung it from every structure that we could find. See, on September 11th, they thought that they broke our backs, but they rekindled our spirits. On September 11th, they thought that they weakened our hearts, but they improved our capacity to love. See, on September 11th, they thought that they destroyed our will, but they only strengthened our resolve. You see, on September 12th, this nation rose above its petty differences and said with a resounding voice that we will not go gentle in that good night. On September 13th, we abandoned all political parties and reminded each other that the birth of this nation started with we the people. On September 14th, we began to remember that this was not the first time that we had been attacked. Like we did on December 7th, 1941, when we rose above the ashes and declared ourselves one of the greatest countries on this earth. See, from flood to famine, from economic depression to civil unrest, from wars home and wars abroad, we are still by our legacy of persistence and purpose. For you see, this day is not just about first responders. This day is not just about the ones we lost. This day is not just about tragedy. This day is also about triumph. This day is about a people of all color and all faith living in a land blessed by the smile of our Creator, united in the struggle against those who bring evil upon us. As I close, you see, and I remind you that 138 years before September 11th, our President Abraham Lincoln told us that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. Finally, we will use this day to honor the sacrifice of so many by remembering. But more importantly, we will continue to use this day to remind those who tried to hurt us that we will never forget. Thank you all, and God bless.
Thank you, Sheriff Roundtree. Other developments that fateful day. After President Bush put the military on high alert, the U.S. Navy dispatched missile destroyers to New York and Washington, D.C., not knowing what was next. The 47-story 7 World Trade Center collapsed after burning for hours. The building had been evacuated that morning. No casualties there. Rescue workers had to flee for their lives when 7 World Trade Center fell. That's right where that new World Trade Center tower stands, on that portion of the Ground Zero property. And later that night, President Bush returned to the White House after stopping at military bases there in Louisiana and then later in Nebraska. He addressed the nation that night, calling the attacks evil, despicable acts of terror, and declaring that America, its friends and allies, would stand together to win the war against terrorism. A path that his successor, President Obama, continues to follow, and no doubt many presidents down the road, considering the developments in recent weeks, will have to continue to follow. Representative Ernest Smith spends a good bit of his time outside of Augusta, representing us in the state capitol, doing good work in Atlanta along with our legislative delegation, and for that we're grateful. We're also very appreciative of Representative Smith's service to this nation. He has vast experience in the United States Air Force, knows a ton about air traffic controlling, and so we're glad to have an aviation perspective today as we welcome Representative Ernest Smith to the podium.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you so much. What a wonderful time to be here in Augusta to celebrate and commemorate where we are because of the sacrifices made by so many brave souls. On that particular day, 9/11/2001, I was at Augusta Regional Airport, former aviation commissioner, and we were looking over plans, and we've already codified plans to build a brand new air passenger terminal at Augusta Regional Airport on that day. It was going to be a midfield terminal with 2 runways, parallel runways. And we were sitting, and someone said, "You need to look at television." And we went into the room and sat quietly as everything unfolded, and you all saw what occurred. What that seminal act did was completely change the direction that we had taken with respect to building a terminal. We had to recalibrate, and you see the end process of what we came up with. But, band of brothers and sisters, September 12th in Dallas, Texas, Southwest Airlines was the only airline in the country that flew. And they announced to all Texas that they wanted people to come out and see them take off. And if you could have seen all along the fence, thousands of Texans just yelling and screaming and cheering and waving American flags because Southwest was flying. Now keep in mind, they didn't have anywhere to go, but they wanted to show symbolically that Americans are not broken and not deterred. There was not a dry eye on the fence, was not a dry eye on the inside. But again, band of brothers and sisters, if you look back behind you now, you see our first responders. And I want you to not just commemorate and celebrate this day, I want you to understand what this means about first responders. Our law enforcement and our fire persons and our paramedics typically see the worst of everything. Every single day. I want you to keep that in mind. Some days we have bad days. They deal with the worst of the worst every single day. Every day. But band of brothers and sisters, just give you a snapshot. Last year, time approximate, a good friend, the late Quincy Murphy, was laid to rest in Augusta, Georgia. I wasn't at his funeral, but my absence was not conspicuous. I was at a funeral in Louisiana. As a disabled veteran and a former commander, one of my troops had passed, and I had to speak at his homegoing. So the priority for me was to one of my men. No one missed me here. I would have been missed there because I had to do then what I'm doing now. Band of brothers and sisters. Understand that does not mean black, white, Latino, or other. Band of brothers and sisters means that we are committed to ensuring that we put patriotism before partisanship. We don't let the political process get involved in trying to ensure that we can provide a good quality of life for everyone. Your safety is tantamount. That's why your law enforcement people do what they do. That's why your fire persons do what they do. It is not just a job, it is a calling. So on this day, as we commemorate all of the lives that were lost on 9/11, remember the band of brothers and sisters that stood up fearlessly to ensure that they could provide some modicum of safety for at least one person. And as you go forth today, celebrate in knowing that we have that same blend of band of brothers and sisters right here in Augusta, Georgia. So on this day, let us not be morose, let us not be sad, let us rejoice in knowing that we are America strong. And we are patriots. We believe in what we're espousing. This is a great day to be an American, and it's an even greater day to be an Augustan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative, and thanks again for your service. Deeply, deeply appreciated. A lot of things have changed since 9/11, you know that. And since Representative Smith's area of expertise is aviation, I thought I'd remind you of a huge change that we've noticed at our airports. Just 2 months after the attacks, 2 months later, was when Congress federalized airport security. That's when the TSA was created back in the post-9/11 days. Before that, security was handled by each airport. Many airports outsourced that to private companies. No longer. Federal employees took over through the TSA. We also had the Patriot Act, and that may be the most recognizable piece of legislation after September 11th, but did you know? More than 130 pieces of 9/11 related legislation were introduced in Congress in the year, just the first year after the attacks. 48 of those got approved and signed into law. The 9/11 Health and Compensation Act of 2010 provided $4.2 billion for health care costs for people who worked at Ground Zero, both on those days and after the attacks during the cleanup. The Department of Homeland Security was created, as you know. That consolidated a lot of government agencies, including the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service. More than 263 government organizations in all were either created or reorganized following the attacks. We're very close to the moment when the South Tower fell. Once again, I'll ask if you're able to rise so that we may mark that moment. And as we begin our moment of silence and reflection, it will conclude with the tolling of the bell by our friends from the Augusta Fire Department. Won't you pause with me?
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of gray, for purple mountains' majesty above thy fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
America barely had time to process that first tower falling when moments later we witnessed the North Tower collapsing as well. A moment of silence for that occasion, followed by the tolling of the bell.
Would you bow with me again, please? Gracious God, we have had many remembrances, many thoughts, many things flood through our minds this morning as we remember what happened on that fateful day. But again, I ask that you would help us to concentrate not so much on the disaster as on the heroes who demonstrated their determination to serve their community and their nation on that day. And on our heroes that continue to serve. We have become painfully aware that there's little that one man can build that another man can't destroy if he wishes to bad enough. But those are all material things. We have again been reminded that those things can be destroyed, but our resolve will not be destroyed. Our love for one another will not be destroyed. Our appreciation, not only for our brothers in law enforcement, but our brothers in the fire service, and our brothers and sisters in other areas of emergency responding. We deeply appreciate the ones that have sacrificed and those that are willing to do so. We ask that in our minds and thinking and in our own individual determination to make a difference, that you would guide each one of us as to what we should not only think, but what we should do. And may we each determine to make our contribution to our community, to our nation, to the agency for which we serve. We have so many opportunities, and we will not be destroyed. Thank you for your presence, for your help and blessing. As King David once said, our help cometh from the Lord. We thank you for that in our Savior's name.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
13 years later, and September 11th is not just another day. Ground Zero will never be just a park. The Augusta Common will never be just the site of a ceremony that we get through on a September 11th morning, because we all remember. Augusta Fire Department Chief Chris James.
In closing, as we discuss what we were doing and where we were 13 years ago to date, as first responders, we were always being prepared and getting ready for these type of events. 13 years ago to date, at the time of this tragedy, the Augusta Fire Department was conducting a National Fire Department course called the Emergency Response to Terrorism. The focus of that class, of course, we had been focused and training on the events that had took place in Oklahoma City. And we were learning how to look at bombs and bags that could be set up as bombs. And we were learning this, and in the middle of that class, someone said, "Stop. Let's turn on the television." And this tragedy became the focus of that class. On that day, we had 343 firefighters and paramedics killed. We had 23 New York City police officers killed. We had 37 Port Authority police officers killed. We had a total of 2,977 citizens killed, to include those in New York, those in Washington, D.C., and those in the field outside of Shanksville, Pennsylvania. As the years pass and the spotlight is dimmed on in many communities, as Brad mentioned earlier, Augusta will never forget the sacrifice made on that fateful day. Although thousands of miles away, we have a bond with the men and women that rushed toward that burning building as the others ran away from it. It's a bond that unites us, whether fighting fires, responding to medical emergencies, or responding to calls for help. It's a bond that sees no race or gender. Rather, it's built on the commitment to serving others that are in need. Today, we pause for a brief moment to remember the tragedy that will forever be etched in our hearts and minds. It's a tragedy that tore down buildings and tore apart lives. It ended hopes and dreams while beginning many years of questions and sorrow. But now we stand as an example of the strength of the American spirit. Our country was bruised on September 11th, but it was not broken. Our spirit was fractured from the loss and fear. But now we stand strong together as one. As we leave this ceremony, let's not forget the sacrifice of those who died and the continued commitment to service by those who live behind the red line of the fire service and the blue line of law enforcement. May the spirit of those who died continue to live through the men and women who strive to protect and serve every day. So at this time, I'd like to say thank you for coming out each year, as we have done since September 11th, to conduct this ceremony so that we can remember those that gave the ultimate sacrifice, those that went forward to serve their citizens, knowing the danger that they had before them. It is our hope that we always continue this ceremony. As we said, that Augusta will never forget. We will continue to prepare, as we were doing on that day of that event since that time. Our department, your sheriff's office, your law enforcement, all of your government agencies have continued to prepare for this. and we continue to prepare for the new dangers and the new issues that come forth. The great thing that I see in Augusta is we do this as a team. In Augusta, we do this as we work together. As Brad mentioned earlier, we had a rescue last night. The Augusta Fire Department did not do that rescue alone. The Richmond County Sheriff's Office was there as well, assisting, and both agencies jumped in to help get the child out. That's the type of public safety that you have overall in the city of Augusta. And I want the citizens to know that we feel that this is the best service that you can get, bar none, anywhere else. And again, I'd like to say thank you for coming out, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone next year.
Thank you, Chief. You all have a wonderful day. We appreciate your attendance.